John Wayne Gacy is one of America's most prolific serial killers. John Wayne Gacy was born in Chicago, Illinois on March 17th, 1942. And as a child, John was actually really close with his mother and his sisters, but he had a terrible relationship with his father, John Sr. His father had a very serious problem, and he was also a rageaholic, meaning every time he would turn kind of into a monster. John really wanted his father's approval, and his father really wanted a kind of manly son, and for a while there he felt like John just wasn't manly enough. This all was very traumatic for John and very hurtful, and all this anger started just building up inside. Then in 1949, he actually committed his first crime that we know of. He and another young boy were accused of fondling this other young girl that they were playing with. And John's father found out about this and was furious. Then that same year, something really horrible happened to John. His dad had a family friend who was a contractor that he did some business with. And John trusted this guy. And one time he went on a ride with him in his truck, and he was by him. And this didn't just happen once. It happened again and again and again. And John sadly kept this a secret because he thought his father would actually get mad at him for it, which there's a good chance he would have. So John Wayne Gacy had a lot of health issues growing up, and one of them was a bad heart condition, and this kept him from doing a lot of things when he was younger, including playing any sports. So in 4th grade, John's health started getting worse, and he started experiencing blackouts. They ended up being these really intense seizures, and he would pass out afterwards. And his father ended up accusing him of faking the condition, said he was purposely doing this as an excuse to fail school. And even though he was having all of these health issues, his father did not lay off the beatings at all. They only got worse as he got older. So in 1960, when John turned 18, he decided he wanted to get into politics, and he ended up joining the Democratic Party. And his father really did not like this because he was a very serious Republican, and he ended up thinking that John was a traitor by doing this. But surprisingly, that year his father actually did something nice for him. He bought him a car, but he didn't just pay for it. It was more of a loan situation where John was going to be paying him back. But John really felt like this was just a way to control him, to keep him under their wing for a little longer after he was 18. And whenever John and him disagreed, or he did something that his father did not like, he would take the keys from him and hide them. And this seemed to be the last straw for John. He decided that it was time he left home. And what is the dream place for a teenager to run away to? Las Vegas, Nevada. So he actually found work with an ambulance service company before he was transferred to work as a mortuary attendant. And later on, he confessed that one night he decided that he wanted to check out a coffin with a body in it. And he crawled into a coffin of a young teenage boy who was in there, and he cuddled with him for a little bit until he suddenly got a little freaked out and got out of it. Apparently it freaked him out so much and caused this internal sense of panic that he decided to go home. He enrolled in Northwestern Business College and graduated in 1963. After college, John took a management trainee position with the Nunn Bush Shoe Company, and in 1964 he was transferred to a Springfield, Illinois location, and this is how he met his wife, Marilyn Myers. And after 9 months of dating, the couple married in September of 1964. After they got married, Marilyn's father ended up buying 3 Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurants in Waterloo, Iowa. And so Gary and his new wife, Marilyn, decided to move to Waterloo to run these restaurants. On one occasion in 1966, his father actually pulled him aside and apologized to him. He said, "I was wrong about you, son." But in reality, John was living a double life. He was cheating on his wife with a lot of local, and he was also starting to get really creepy on the employees that worked at his KFC restaurants. He liked to hire the youngest guys possible, and he seemed to like to hang out around the boys that he hired. In fact, John even had a club in his basement for these guys to hang out at. He would socialize with them, flirt with them, and he would give them before making advances on them. And then in August of 1967, John Wayne Gacy committed his first, well, that we know of, assault on a teenage boy. The victim was 15-year-old Donald Voorhees, and he actually had lured him back to his house with the promise of showing him some adult content. And over the months after this continued with other guys from the KFC. So in March of 1968, Donald ended up reporting to his father about what John had been doing to him. And Donald's father, of course, was beyond mad and went straight to the police. And the police wasted no time. They actually arrested him and charged him with oral. And John ended up denying all of this. And he told his family and friends that he was being set up. He's being framed because he was part of the Democratic Party. And on May 10th, 1968, he was indicted on that charge. He entered a plea of guilty for the one count of, but he pleaded not guilty to all other charges. And on the day that he was charged, his wife filed for divorce. He was granted parole with 12 months of probation after serving 18 months of his 10-year sentence. And letting him out of jail would be a huge mistake. So he arrived in Chicago on June 19th, and he ended up getting a job as a cook. In August of 1971, he started dating this new woman named Carol Hoff. Eventually, he asked her to marry him, and she really didn't know what a monster he was, so she said yes. After they got married, he decided to quit his job as a cook, and he started a construction company called PDM. And again, John liked to hire teenage boys. In 1973, he ended up taking one of these boys on a business trip with him to Florida, and he ended up assaulting him there. So John Wayne Gacy was pretty well liked in his community. He was considered gracious and helpful. John was actually rewarded for serving his community. He also got a membership to the local Moose Club, which I guess is like a country club. And this is when he first found out about the Jolly Joker Clown Club. This was a group of clown volunteers that would host events. They would go to charity events, go perform for kids in hospitals. It was all voluntary. They weren't getting paid. And John joined this and became a clown. So around 1975, John Wayne Gacy decided that he wanted to come out, at least to his wife, as bisexual. And then one night, John's sister-in-law was at his house, and he didn't know that she was there. And so he pulled up, and he had one of his victims with him, a teenage boy, a blonde boy. And he pulled up to his house, and the two of them got out of the car and started walking in when his sister-in-law came out and greeted them. Then he was like, "Oh, we were just stopping by to get something. We're gonna get out of here." And he got back in the car with the boy and left. But then his sister-in-law looked into his garage, and it was scary. He had a whole setup in there waiting for this boy. So in March of 1976, John and his wife decided mutually to get divorced, and this is when things started to get really crazy. So on January 2nd, 1972, John picked up a 16-year-old named Timothy Jack McCoy from Chicago's Greyhound bus terminal. And John told Timothy that he would bring him back the next day to the terminal, that he could spend the night at his house, and then he would be back in time to catch a bus tomorrow. So they went back to his house, and who really knows what happened that night. But according to John, he was woken up that morning by this kid Timothy standing in his bedroom doorway with a knife. John said that he leaped from the bed and raised both of his arms to kind of protect himself and surrender, and this accidentally tilted the knife and it cut him on the arm, and he does have a scar to back this story up. He then twisted the knife away from Timothy, and then he just went wild on him and him repeatedly until he... It turns out that Timothy was never trying to Gacy. He actually had made him breakfast. So this is when John decided to bury him in his own house in the crawl space by dumping concrete over top his body. The second that he committed was around January of 1974, and this victim is still unidentified. And he ended up burying this unidentified victim in his backyard about 15 feet away from his barbecue pit. So by 1975, his business was expanding rapidly, and most of the guys on the staff were young high school boys. And one of these young men was a 15-year-old named Anthony. And one day at work, Anthony injured his foot and had to take the following day off from work. So John knew that he would be home and that he would be weak because of his foot and not suspecting anything, so he decided to show up at his house and attack him. But the thing that he didn't know is that Tony was a wrestler and he could fight back. One thing that John loved to do to his victims was put handcuffs on them. So he somehow gets the cuffs onto Tony, but the one on his right wrist was loose and he was able to wiggle out of it. However, Gacy did not know this, and he had just left the room right before thinking that Anthony was all cuffed up. And when he came back in the room, Anthony pounced on him. And he ended up fighting with John until he was able to get his arms behind his back and handcuff him. And eventually the two of them kind of calmed down and just started talking, and they agreed mutually that he would let him go and they would pretend that this never happened. So after this failed attempt, John did not wait long to attack somebody else. It was on July 29th, 1975 that one of his employees, 17-year-old John Butkovich, disappeared. So he lured the boy back to his house, and he tricked him into putting on those handcuffs, and he him, which is what he did to a lot of his victims. And then he buried his body under his garage floor. In October of 1975, another one of John's marriages failed. They agreed that she could live in his house with the kids for a little while. So the majority of the that John committed happened between 1976 and 1978. And he refers to this time as his cruising years. Soon after his divorce was finalized, John ended up in an 18-year-old boy named Daryl Sampson. 5 weeks later, on the afternoon of May 14th, a 15-year-old named Randall Reffitt disappeared while walking home from school. And only hours after Randall had been abducted, another boy was abducted, Samuel Stapleton, and he vanished as he was walking home from his sister's apartment. He buried them both together in the crawl space. On June 3rd, 1976, a 17-year-old Lakeview teenager named Michael Bonin. Just like the others, he was and was buried in the crawl space. Then 10 days later, a 16-year-old in Uptown named William Carroll was also by John and buried beneath his kitchen this time. So the next was on July 26, 1976. John had employed this 18-year-old named David Cram, and on August 21st, David moved into John's house. And the following day, John had convinced him to put on those handcuffs for a fun little trick and then never took them off. But David had spent a year in the army, and he was not having any of this handcuff shit, so he kicked John in the face and he freed himself from the handcuffs. However, he didn't move out. About a month later, John decided that he wanted to assault him, but David fought back again. He was able to resist him and nothing ever happened. And after this, he finally decided to move out. It's believed that during this time, around August to October of 1976, that John had a couple of people, and there were two unidentified males that they thought that he had during this time. On June 13th, he had a guy named William Carroll, and he buried the unidentified guy, William Carroll, and another guy whose name is Rick Johnston. He was last seen on August 6th, and he buried them all together. On October 24th, 1976, he abducted and killed two teenage friends named Kenneth Parker and Michael Marino. 2 days later, a 19-year-old employee of PDM named William Bundy disappeared after informing his family that he was going to be attending a party. In December of 1976, another PDM employee went missing. This time it was 17-year-old Gregory Godzik. And his family ended up calling John to see if he knew anything, and he said, "Oh, so sorry to hear of another runaway from my company." Then a month later, on January 20th, 1977, John Sheds, who was 19 years old at the time, also disappeared. So now he's got quite a few bodies in his house, and some people are suspicious, but he hasn't been caught yet. So sometime between December of 1976 and March of 1977, John killed another unidentified boy. He also a 20-year-old named John Prestige. In April of 1977, John ended up getting engaged to a woman that he had been dating for about 3 months, and she moved in. However, by mutual agreement, the engagement was called off and she moved out of the home. It's thought that he didn't commit any murders during this time, but we definitely don't know. But then in August of 1977, a clue actually popped up in the case of John Sheds. Michael Rossi had actually bought John Sheds' car from John Wayne, and Michael was actually arrested for stealing gasoline. And when he was brought in, they asked him where he got the car, and he said he got it from John. And that's when they realized it was John Sheds' car and started to be pretty suspicious of John, that he had sold it to someone else. But when he was questioned, he told police that John had just wanted to sell him his car because he wanted to run away. And police believed this. In 1977, John started dating Carol Hoff again, the one from before. And also by the end of this year, 1977, he is thought to have 6 more boys. Eventually, another teenager went missing, and this time it was 19-year-old U.S. Marine named John Mowry. On October 17th, a 21-year-old from Minnesota named Russell Nelson disappeared as well. So as you can see, John really had a pattern. Then only 4 weeks later, a 16-year-old from Kalamazoo named Robert Winch was murdered and also buried in the crawl space. And right after that, on November 18th, a 20-year-old who was a father actually, named Tommy Boiling, disappeared after leaving a Chicago bar. 3 weeks later, on December 9th, a 19-year-old U.S. Marine named David Talsma disappeared. On December 30th, 1977, Gacy a 19-year-old college student named Robert Donnelly from a Chicago bus stop. And he took Robert home and kind of changed up his normal plan. This time he decided to him with various devices. Now it's so weird, and I don't know why he decided to do this. He brought him back to his place of work and released him. And Robert ended up reporting the assault, and Gacy ended up being questioned because of that. And when they questioned him, he said they did some kinky stuff, but it was all consensual. And sadly, the police believed him and no charges were filed. The following month, he a 19-year-old named William Kindred, and he disappeared on February 16th, 1978. And William was actually the final victim to be buried in the crawl space at John's house. It was getting a little full in there, so after this, John started disposing of bodies in a local river, the Des Plaines River. In March of 1978, Gacy lured a 26-year-old named Jeffrey Ringnall into his car, where he chloroformed him and then brought him back to his house. And he didn't either. And he reported it to police and they did nothing. They didn't even investigate. So one time he was visiting a local pharmacy and there was a 15-year-old there. His name was Robert Peast, and John talked to him and ended up offering him a job that was paying him better than the pharmacy was. Robert informed his mother of the job offer and told her that he was going to go meet up with John and discuss it further, and this was the last time that she saw him. When he didn't return home, she filed a missing persons report. And John was seen by multiple witnesses at the pharmacy talking to this young boy, and this was reported to the police. John, of course, denied any involvement. He didn't know where the boy was, and at this point, he was placed on 24-hour surveillance. And at one point when they were visiting his house, one of the officers asked to go to the bathroom, and John said, "Sure, here's the bathroom." And when the guy was in there, he could smell through the vent the smell of. So the officer instantly knew that there had to be bodies in that house. And this actually gave them the reason to pursue a search warrant of the house. On December 20th, John had an appointment with his lawyers. They were going to be talking about his current civil trial he was dealing with. But upon his arrival, he appeared disheveled and immediately wanted a drink. And then he super casually walked over to the desk in the lawyer's office and picked up a magazine. And on the cover of the magazine was missing Robert Peast. And he threw the magazine down and said, "The boy's dead. He's in a river." And that's when he confessed it all to his lawyers. So his lawyers arranged a psychiatric consultation for him at 9 a.m. the next morning. And when he woke up, he didn't remember any of his confession. So after leaving his lawyer's house, he went to a local gas station. And while he was there, he filled up his car and he went inside and he ended up handing a little bag of to the kid that was working at the gas station. His name is Lance Jacobson. And the boy ended up reporting this and also told his surveillance officers that John had told him that the end is coming for me. After this, John drove to his friend's house, whose name is Ronald, and he was also a contractor that he worked with. And he walked in the house and hugged his friend and started crying and said, "I'm going down. 30 people. After he told his friend, he left and he actually went back to visit two of his victims that got away, Michael Rossi and David Cram. He spoke with them for a little while, and then after he left their house, Cram ended up reporting to the police that John had confessed to 30 people. John knew that he was going to get caught, that he just had a few hours left of freedom, so he actually went to his father's grave, spent some time there talking to him. And on December 21st at around 4:30 p.m., a search warrant was granted for John Wayne Gacy's house. So the time had come. When they first arrived at his house, of course, John was not there, and he had actually messed up his sump pump on purpose and flooded the basement as an effort to, ruin evidence and make it harder for them. And on December 22nd, John actually decided to go back with the police and cooperate and show them where the rest of the bodies were around the house. So the trial against John Wayne Gacy began on February 6th, 1980, and he was formally charged with the murders of 33 young men. And Gacy's defense team ended up entering a not guilty plea because of reasons of insanity. He was determined to be fit to stand trial, but this did not sway the jury at all. It only took them 2 hours to convict him on all 33 counts of murder. The jury also recommended that he gets 12 death sentences and an execution date of June 2nd, 1980. And the victims' family members were very happy with this outcome. And one thing that just really all of the victims' families is that he showed no remorse, and he was put to death by lethal injection on May 9th, 1994. Now, a lot of serial killers express emotion or rage at the end, or some will say they didn't do it or say something scary, but John did none of these things. His last words were, "Kiss my ass." In the end, John was responsible for the deaths of 33 men that we know of, and 6 of them are still unidentified to this day. But that is it for me today, guys. Stay safe and stay spooky.